everyone. I'm Ileana Chan, and I'm here with my co-host Sara Vivacqua. We are back, our
We're
first
back.
weekly live. How are you feeling about this new year, Sara?
Well, an old new year, isn't it? More of the same, just the worst version. So, Ileana, we are here back from our holidays. I am in London, back in London. I have forgotten how wet this place is. The size of your hair tripled. Your clothes become smelly everywhere you touch. It's falling like everything is falling because it's so wet. I had it all forgotten how difficult it is. Like the British architecture is not adapted to the weather. I don't know if you noticed this. It doesn't matter if it's a new build, if it's an old Victorian house. It gets wet everywhere inside of the house. Everything gets molded. It's really the Brits are not good engineers. They might be good in something else, but definitely not good engineers.
Well, this is very fitting because as the empire is dying, as evidenced in the global north countries, like if you're actually in them, if you live in them, we do actually notice it affecting our countries too. But today, I mean, for those of you who might, I think the people in our chat right now and the people watching might be people that have watched us before. But if you haven't, we are a weekly Empire Watch Weekly Live is a weekly show every Friday at 12 p.m. UTC. And we break down the weekly news from around the world through an anti-imperial lens. Now, this week, we're going to be having a special episode mainly on Venezuela. And we do have two really special guests. But I'm going to bring up this little graphic to show what we're covering today. But I see that we also do have Francisco Dominguez, one of our special guests, in the studio already. So we will go directly to Venezuela, if that's okay, Sara. That makes sense, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. I mean, really eager to talk to Francisco Dominguez. And later on, we will have Jesús Rodríguez-Espinoza, the editor of Orinoco Tribune, as well. And he will actually be speaking to us from Venezuela, live from Venezuela. So that will be really interesting. But today we will be talking about, as I have mentioned, the U.S. invasion of Venezuela and kidnapping of President Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores. And we'll be talking about the ramifications of that. Anything else to add, Sara, before we let Francisco come on?
Yeah,
I know
just out of curiosity, where were you when you received the news about this barbaric in the literal sense of the word, as if there was no civilization, no multilateral agreements, as if there is no international order? This is a huge setback, but probably not very new for the US because they've been doing this for a long, long, long time. Where were you? What were you doing when you saw the news? Because when I saw the news and I went to Diário do Centro do Mundo where I report and see that this was a report, I thought, okay, no, they are exaggerating. God, why they're doing such a sensationalistic line about this? And then I realized it was true. I was absolutely shocked I'd say for 3 days at least. What about you?
I can't even remember where I was, but to be completely honest, because we had that show right before we broke for the national security strategy with KJ No. And the main thing that my takeaway from that was, this line that he was basically saying, which was Latin America is the appetizer of this U.S. empire rampaging. And China is the main course and Russia is now the dessert. And I was just thinking, like, what is the manifestation of that going to be like? The idea that it's all this, because when you read the national security strategy, there is nothing in that to suggest that they are pulling back from the world stage. Like, in my opinion, even though a lot of the media reports sort of suggested that they were pulling back, maybe changing course, changing tactics. But I felt it was a very, very aggressive dossier. So, in some ways I wasn't surprised. And then in other ways, I mean, we will talk more and get Francisco and Jesus's right into this. It doesn't.
I think the dossier you're talking about, national security strategy, which Trump says is the new Don Rodo doctrine. Now he's making from Donald Trump. He, as a re-edition, he said we are gonna escalate this. It just
Oh no, I think we've lost you for a little bit, Sara. Yeah, just sort of to add to that, while Sara gets her internet back, I'm going to bring on Francisco. Oh, you're back. We lost you for a little bit. Your internet crapped out, but you're
just saying that this national security strategy that you mentioned, which Trump coined as Don Roe doctrine, in allusion to Monroe Doctrine, it's Don for Donald. It just says basically that Latin America belongs to the U.S. and it's a colonial extension it's a colony of the U.S., the entire Latin America. Well, he doesn't know about Latin American people, the Latin American history. They never did because they are very ignorant, and how Latin America has a history of revolutions and a very alive left wing, very different from Europe. Okay, we are here with our incredible guest, Francisco Dominguez, who I know for a long, long time. Yeah, we've been in many fights together.
Many fights together. That is okay. That's amazing.
Many fights for justice in many events for Latin America. Francisco, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming and for accepting this invitation. I think there's no better person in the UK to talk about Venezuela than you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on. This is great. I've been doing these sort of things for the last few days, and this is another one where we want to update people. But thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Francisco, for coming on. And I'm just going to read Francisco's bio for everybody so that everyone knows. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people watching will know who Francisco is, but Dr. Francisco Dominguez is the former head of the research group on Latin America at Middlesex University. He is currently the national security of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign in the UK, and also a member of the executive committees of the Nicaragua Solidarity Campaign and the Cuba Solidarity Campaign in the UK. And also you are part of the Friends of Socialist China committee and campaign, maybe. Can we call that a campaign? He is also co-author of Right Wing Politics in New Latin America by Zed Books. So welcome, Francisco. And obviously with that background, you will have a lot of insight into what we're currently facing. Any comments right off the bat before we get into it?
Yeah, I think everybody's been shocked. Not because there was an invasion or a military attack. We expected something more conventional. I was expecting a massive military attack with the war fleet deployed in the Caribbean Sea. And I imagine, I had a nightmare scenario in my head. They would go like Iraq, Syria, and other places, bombing cities, destroying everything in their path, and then continue carpet bombing for as long as it took. I was thinking 3-4 weeks. And then after that, they might send boots on the ground to try to control the thing. But the way it happened was just a purely gangster-like operation. Black gangs would do. And the kidnapping of the president, in a sense, is a smart move, but in another sense, it's not very smart. Nevertheless, it was shocking. And although compared to the scenario just described, this one is much milder, the brutality of it was quite horrific. They bombed 4 cities, in Miranda, Caracas, Aragua, La Guaira. They targeted mainly military installations as well as civilian installations. I understand they had the capacity to disable digital systems of detection, particularly of aircraft carrier. They use 150 aircraft, war aircraft, war planes, helicopters and so on, which were deployed from 20 military bases in the area. So in other words, they've been putting together this, for some time. They had military assets in Puerto Rico, in Trinidad and Tobago, in Guyana, and many other places around the place where they have military bases, such as in Honduras, in El Salvador, certainly in Guantanamo Bay, in Cuba. I don't know what the participation was of their military bases in Colombia, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were. So, and the whole thing took everybody by surprise, particularly because of the capacity to disable systems, which is what allowed them to take things by surprise.
Francisco, we had Breno Altman, the Brazilian anti-Zionist, internationally known journalist. He had in November a conversation with Maduro and asked Maduro asked him, what do you think is going to happen? And he said, well, he was predicting what you said, like a targeted military intervention. And Maduro told Breno, no, I think I will be the target. I think I will be killed. And he received this as Maduro as being dramatic. And now he understands that Maduro had a very precise notion of the risks he was running into. So I want to ask you, Maduro was fully aware and probably not naive at all, far less than he knew what could be coming. And why did he fail? There are so many theories out there. Some people, you have the CIA talking points, which says Jesús Rodríguez was betraying him, or there was somebody in the military betraying him. We know that the CIA is trying to recruit many people from the Venezuela and Chavista movement, paying them, harassing them, so they will turn their heads on the revolution. We know the massive amount of money of the CIA in there. Some people are talking about betrayal. Some people talk about incompetence. Some people are talking about a immense cyber superiority of the US. In your opinion, what enabled this attack, since Maduro himself knew this could be coming and he could be a target?
I saw Breno's interview last time. I know Breno. And I saw the last one he's done. I don't agree with him, to be blunt. The ginormous military technological capacity, including intelligence capacity of the United States, should never be underestimated. My point is this: no matter what you do, no matter how much you defend yourself, no matter how good you be, they'll find a way, because they're sinister, because they're plotters and so on. The capacity to actually disable things in a very, substantial attack as they did, I think is something they planned. Fidel Castro suffered the attempts of his life 683 times. So, Maduro knew what the score was. So did Chavez, and so did Correa, and so does Lula to some degree, and others. So that's in the nature.
I think Lula remains very naive about the US still, but we're going to get to that later.
I think it comes with the territory. If you are a left-wing revolutionary president and happen to be in their backyard, they will assassinate you if they can. They will assassinate anybody in the United States if they need to. So I'm not surprised that Maduro drew the right conclusion, said, okay, remember there was an attempt on his life on the 4th of August in 2023, I think it was, where they sent drones with CS explosives, and both of them were neutralized before, they caused damage. But more important than all of this is this: there is no fracture whatsoever in the armed forces in Venezuela. They remain absolutely solid. We are aware, not that I have all the information, but I know what is public, what has been reported. The United States has been trying for 27 years to recruit and to corrupt, officers. It managed to get some, but very little. But the overall particularly in these circumstances, especially during the period of 3 months in military intimidation. The armed forces, Bolivarian forces, remain totally solid. That's number one. Number two, the political leadership, the PSUV and the Patriotic Front remain exactly the same, totally solid. That doesn't mean to say the United States did not try. They try everything. And in the previous period, especially during the sanctions period, the United States managed to get some, people who are called points, but in my opinion, they are not, inside Venezuela, to criticize. They became nothing in seconds politically. And then, more important than everything, the very rapid and quick appointment and decision by the Supreme Court, the Council of State, and the armed forces and the Patriotic Front to actually appoint Jesús Rodríguez as interim president to restore the continuity of constitutional and institutional normality, work immediately, right away. And the armed forces expressed, a strong support for her appointment. The Supreme Court did the same, and everybody else. And I think now they've restored normality, and they've been, on the one hand, trying to get the population mobilized, which is a difficult one, in the following sense: they don't want the population to go overboard because that would justify, further attacks. So that's a difficult one: how to mobilize at the same time that you actually ensure that people don't do silly things. In all the previous crises provoked by the opposition, particularly violent crises, the Chavistas movement never ever, not once, attacked visually or violently the headquarters of the opposition parties, members of the opposition. Never, not once. It was always the other way around. And on every occasion, you can say 2004, 2008, 2010, 2006, sorry, first, 2010, 2014, 2017, 2024, every single time the opposition had an opportunity to go for insurrection, they did. And
why is not happening this now? Why are we not seeing any insurrection?
On every occasion, the opposition managed to assassinate 20 people, 15 people, 50 people, 140 people, and so on. And the Chavistas never did. So, given that the conflict we are confronting now is one which is quite delicate because the fleet is still there, still out there waiting for the Chavistas to make a mistake. But the entirety of the whole thing has been maintained very superbly, in my view. And that dispels all the, conspiracy theories that are around. And that's extremely important. She's been totally clear. No foreign agent governs in Venezuela. And she said, I'm the interim president, which is a very specific constitutional principle. She's not replacing President Maduro. She's the interim president as if Maduro went to a trip somewhere, on a head of a state visit somewhere, and then somebody has to be in charge. So she will be in charge as vice president on an interim capacity as acting president. She said, I'm in that interim capacity because the real and only president of Venezuela is Nicolas Maduro, and we'll do everything we can to return it. And then now she's got to negotiate, because there is no other possibility, to seek negotiations with the United States to see what tactically can be done regarding this situation. It seems to me that it's a testament to the revolutionary capacity of the Bolivarian revolution to survive in terms of the state more or less intact, which, although it's been a bit long.
Sarah, did you have a question?
I had, yes. So you were saying that why are we not seeing in Caracas the opposition filling the streets now that Maduro is out, asking for new elections? Is the US trying to gain time on that? There must be something also to do with the US strategy. I'm not sure we can read these oppositional movements in Venezuela as simply as public people manifestation, spontaneously organic on the streets.
I mean, are you saying that there's no mobilization on the streets in Caracas? Because that's not, I don't think.
Opposition.
Oh, from the opposition.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't think we can call the opposition movement in Venezuela as organic, and that there's a level of think tank coordination, US money on that. We didn't see the Nobel Peace Prize, completely marginalized. Why is the US not? Why is the opposition so quiet? And why is the US not asking for new elections? And is it part of the US strategy? What's going on?
There is a short answer and a long one. I'll give you the short one first, which I think is you quote Donald Trump. That gives you the answer. When he was asked at the press conference, when he announced the kidnapping of President Maduro, he was asked exactly about this. And he said, no, not her. And then he was asked why. He said, she enjoys no respect and has no support in Venezuela, which is totally true. The long answer is this. The Venezuelan people suffer hugely under the sanction system inflicted by the United States. If you were to take the suffering from 2017 all the way to 2020, 21, 20 was the limit, more or less. I mean, it was horrific. Between 2017 and 2018 alone, 40,000 people died. And they died because they were denied food, they were denied medicine, they were denied everything, deliberately by the United States. The idea was to asphyxiate the economy by strangling it, by blockading it completely. And, the system organized things in such a way, the imperialists, the United States and its accomplices, organized things in such a way that they took away or they froze all the assets of Venezuela internationally to the tune, I have to figure, between 60 to 80 billion dollars, including the gold in the UK, 31 tons of it, which is part and parcel of the same operation. Just for the audience to give an idea of what 60 to 80 billion means, the GDP of Nicaragua is 14 billion. That gives you an idea how bad it was. And as a consequence of the blockade, Venezuela lost 99% of the oil revenues. In other words, it was operating with 1%. And it's extraordinary. So if you take 1 year as 40,000 having died, and then continue to, add more on a sort of extrapolation basis, I think something like 100 to 150,000 in Venezuela died necessarily as a direct consequence of the sanctions. In Chile, the military dictatorship assassinated 5,000 people in 17 years. So that gives you the idea of the scale. So now the extreme right-wing opposition led by Maria Corina Machado, Juan Guaido, and the United States are telling the population what we want is the United States to come in, destroy everything we have, and we're going to make you suffer so much. So one should distinguish two things. So therefore, that's why the opposition has no support whatsoever inside Venezuela. That doesn't mean to say if there is an election, because people are still, recovering from the economic difficulty the United States has deliberately created, then they must support for the opposition. But when there was election in 2024, I was an international observer there. Days after, when they claimed they won falsely, they called on demonstrations several days consecutively and several weeks consecutively. And the number of people that they managed to attract, this is no exaggeration, including by, eyewitnesses, 1,000 was the largest, 1,000 people. Most of them 100, 200, 300, nothing compared to the Chavista mobilization. So the popularity, if it had any, of Maria Corina Machado and the extreme by opposition evaporated after they began to demand, a military attack. And now with the actual military attack taking place, people know they will lose everything they've gained over the last 27 years. It evaporated even further. And that's why, Trump said what he said, because they know that the position is very unpopular.
So, go ahead.
If you have a follow-up question, otherwise I'm gonna have Francisco sort of like widen the scope a little bit. But if you had a follow-up question to that.
There's a follow-up question. So Francisco, what I'm hearing you saying is that these strikes actually, paradoxically or not, helped the Chavismo, because people saw what West's presence looked like in a very brutal way. Could you say that this is, in a way, paradoxically, that could be played in favor of the Chavista movement?
I'll answer you by using the example of Brazil, which I'm sure you're aware of. The right wing, through quite effective, nasty propaganda, created the conditions to impeach Dilma Rousseff in 2016, and through framing up President Lula, then they sent him to prison for 9 years. They appealed to the Supreme Court, and that was increased to 12 years. So, and Bolsonaro was elected as a consequence of this context, with 55% of the vote. And I remember talking to Brazilian friends and comrades, and they were saying to me, that's the end. There is no possibility. This is going to last, 40 years, 20 years, whatever. I said, it's not that simple. I remember, they always charged me with being over-optimistic. Bolsonaro destroyed the Brazilian economy in 2 years, completely destroyed it, to the point that even the right wing in Brazil, Revista Veja, would you believe it? Estadão de São Paulo, this sort of right-wing newspaper were saying the main problem we confront is them. But the point I'm making is this: the United States is capable to score victories in this fashion: brutality, propaganda campaign, lies, violence, and so on. But when it gets there, it's not able to consolidate, because all it offers is brutality, repression, pillage, and military bases, which is not attractive because it leaves the whole population out of any possibility of offering something. So that's what I think. And if you were to compare, Lenin Moreno in Ecuador destroyed the Ecuadorian economy in 4 years. Janine Añez destroyed the Bolivian economy in 1 year. So this is exactly the reason. People know. If you were to ask the Cubans, why do you want capitalism? You said, look at El Salvador. Look at Haiti, it's just there, right next door. They know exactly what it is. They might be discontent with, the government policies because there is not enough money, there's hardship and so on. But it doesn't mean to say they'll go for insurrectionary. And that's exactly the situation in Venezuela. All the insurrections, so-called, that have supposed to have taken place in Venezuela took place only in a very small part of cities, particularly Caracas, in the east of Caracas, where the very rich lives. Otherwise, the rest of the country was quite calm. The problem was the media magnified this. So I think these should help, unity. And what I've seen in these demonstrations, which are gigantic in Venezuela now, they're outraged and they're demanding the return of President Maduro and Celia Flores, everywhere, absolutely everywhere. But it's interesting that there is an opposition inside Venezuela who has elected representatives at the level of majors, MPs, governors, and so on. They have joined the demonstration. They have been on national television together with Chavistas, denouncing the whole thing and say they're going to resist. So in that sense, there is a national united front which is organized around, Chavismo, the Civil Military Alliance, and of course, we'll see what the United States does in terms of knowing whether they're going to succeed or not. But the whole thing is intact. That's the good thing. Rather than chaotic and so on. Don't believe El País, The Guardian, and so on. They're saying there is chaos, there is panic shopping. And so. Nothing like that is going on.
That's really interesting. And I think for a lot of us anti-imperialists, very comforting to hear, Francisco. But of course, we can't, as you've sort of alluded to already in this conversation, we absolutely cannot be underestimating the US empire and US propaganda. I do think what you're pointing to, though, is a division between global North awareness of US empire and global South awareness of US empire. Certainly, the global south has more of awareness because they see the direct results, whereas we in the global north are just insulated by the incredible machinery of US propaganda. I mean, right now the US is justifying the invasion of Venezuela and the kidnapping of President Maduro as a police action. How the US has any sort of jurisdiction there, but it's apparent police action due to narco-terrorism charges and the removal of a dictator, as if the US has any sort of place to determine these factors. Now, the reality is that Venezuela is a key anti-imperialist ally. I mean, according to the hyper-imperialism dossier, the Tricontinental Research Institute's dossier, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Francisco. It's something I do tend to refer to a lot because I think it gives us a easy sort of framework to understand what U.S. empire is and what the U.S.-led global north is. And they do put here as Venezuela is one of the 6 socialist independent countries. Now that's like 6 out of 195 countries that is socialist independent. So it's a very small number of countries that can really call themselves sovereign or independent. So this is obviously a huge blow, but also it explains, I think, to your point, why the Venezuela itself is so intact, because this is not an easy struggle to get to sovereignty or to get to socialist independence. Can you, though, explain the significance on the attack to Venezuela in terms of the Caribbean, the Latin America, and Latin America as a whole, and sort of make us understand, what this means for the greater geopolitical power shifting, especially given the context that Trump is now saying, Cuba is ready to fall, and has indicated that Colombia and Mexico might be next.
Yeah. I don't want to make this answer too long, but it requires some detailed discussion. So if I go on too much, just stop me. But the position is this. The United States is facing severe decline. And, it's quite severe. It's much more severe than, the normal figures will indicate. But just to give some of them, the most important ones of them all. The GDP of the United States is 30 trillion, and the debt of the United States is 38 trillion. That means the following. If the United States were to use everything it produces in value terms in 1 year, which is gigantic, it's really huge, to pay the debt, we'll still owe 8 trillion more. 8 trillion is nearly double the combined GDPs of all the Latin American countries. That gives you an idea of the problem. That's number one. Number two, in order to maintain its empire internationally, because it's military, basically, it's a military power, the United States is spending in the region of $1 trillion a year in military expenditure. It's got 840 military bases around the world. This is extremely expensive. But at the same time, because the United States decided to deindustrialize in the last 30, 40 years, the US economy, what it did was it took industries, corporations, decided to relocate somewhere else. In Mexico, in the maquilas, in Vietnam, in China, and so to take advantage of cheap labor, huge quantities of it, which was very good because the United States would import huge amount of very cheap goods, which benefit the economy and the population at large. However, as a consequence of importing much, much more than it was exporting, the United States built a trade deficit, which is gigantic. It's something like $1 trillion a year. And the main beneficiaries are China and the European Union, as well as Mexico, Canada, and a few others. So, as a consequence of not having to deal with these problems, the United States has neglected the internal infrastructure of the country, which is crumbling away. And as a consequence of all of this, economic context, the United States ruling class is forced to apply massive austerity on its own population, including repression. The number of people who live below the poverty line in the United States is around 55 to 75 million people. Huge. But worse than that, because of all of this context, the United States economic performance is very poor. The economy of the United States grows at an average rate of 1 to 2%. They say 2%, I think it's 1%. Whereas if you compare with China, which is between 5 to 7%, which means the following: in the next 10 years, the United States, at best, its economy at best is going to be 20% bigger, and the Chinese economy is going to be 70% bigger. In terms of the competitive battle internationally, the United States lost completely. It's not that it's competing to win. No, it's lost already. Out of 64 high-tech industries in the world, China leads 57. And the other 7 are not led by the United States. The United States lead only some of them. So the ruling class, or at least a significant section of the ruling class in the United States, have drawn the following conclusion. If we continue to allow multipolarity to expand, which they haven't because they try to complicate as much as possible, but if they draw the conclusion, if we continue to allow it to expand without something serious, then we will go down. I mean, they will decline. It will become second, they become third, maybe fourth in the world ranking. So they have drawn the conclusion, the only way we can maintain our supremacy is by military means. And Venezuela happens to be, and Cuba happen to be in the front line. That's why it's attacking. That's why the United States are lashing out against China, tariffs and all sorts of other complications. That's why it's lashing against Europe, where it wants resources from them to buy, their military hardware. That's why it's going, supporting the war against Russia in the Ukraine. That's why it's doing everything it's doing. It's just using war as the mechanism to ensure that they maintain their supremacy. They are not sure whether they're going to win, but they are going to try their very best to do this. So this document, the National Security Strategy document that was produced, issued by the United States, by the White House, on the 25th of November 2025, clearly says we are going to prioritize what the Western Hemisphere is our hemisphere. And the point they make about this is this, and this is where, the picture becomes clear why they've done it. They're saying there are authoritarian, communistic, narco-terrorist, whatever adjective they want to use, governments and regimes in Latin America that are caught in and inviting malignant forces from outside the hemisphere, and with which they are making trade deals and investment and all the rest of it, which represent an existential threat to the United States because those are our resources. We are not going to allow this. So that we will do, and this is, the position of the Southern Command. The Southern Command of the United States has to present a report to the Senate Armed Forces Committee every year, which I read. And it's totally clear. What Trump is doing is what they say should be done. So from that point of view, the argument of this, the Southern Command, as well as, this document, his strategy document, is we are going to use every imaginable means, literally they mean the military, to actually ensure that, we don't allow this. And we want to exclude these malignant forces from outside. Now, they call the new strategy, Trump, in a public presentation somewhere, call it the Don't Roll Doctrine, but actually what they call it in the document is the Trump corollary, which is quite an important distinction. The Trump corollary, it's difficult to pronounce that word, come from, Theodore Roosevelt gunboat diplomacy in 1901 to 1909, which the United States began to develop after that, which meant in the Caribbean, in Central America, and even in South America, the United States will go in militarily to sort things out. Whenever any of them misbehave, they will go in. militarily. It was called gunboat diplomacy. And Theodore Roosevelt, he said, when it comes to foreign policy, what you do is you speak very softly, but carry a big stick. So that's why they call Trump corollary. In other words, we are going to use military means to ensure that this hemisphere remains ours. We're going to expel everybody that is from outside the hemisphere, basically China, and we'll use military means to do it. That is the context. So this is what is significant. Now, one final small point, if I may. The method they use with Venezuela, if you think about the Caribbean, it can be applied to many other countries around the place. If you think on the Pacific side, the same can be done against Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, and so on. And if you think further up, the same can do to Central America and Mexico, especially Mexico being squeezed from below and from the top, from the United States. So they can do this to anyone. So it's absolutely vital. And we'll come to discuss these things later on. But it's vital that we ensure that they don't get away with this. That we do everything in order to isolate them and defeat them politically, because to think of something else is not realistic. But it can be defeated politically. Yesterday, Trump suffered a serious defeat by a decision of a majority of the Senate by 50 against 44, including Republicans that voted against him on this question of Venezuela. So this is the key thing that we need. That's why we are organizing campaigns and so on, and people are mobilizing everywhere in the world.
I mean, I think we have to just address that point now, actually, because most people are going to be thinking this, when they're watching this, is what, first of all, you're saying we have to do everything we can to stop that. And what do you mean by that? Can you break that down for us? Because there are two factors here. Obviously, there's us citizens, private citizens, the public, just normal citizens that want this to stop. And then there are also the wider things like geopolitical things, diplomatic things that our countries can do. So if you break it down to what we can do individually, and then we can go into, is there something we can do to pressure our countries to do something more?
Right. That's a fantastic question. Not that the others were not. All of them have been fantastic. This is more fantastic. Let's start from the United States itself, because I think that's crucial, quite important. The level of opposition to Trump's war against Venezuela has been growing by the day. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. 100%. And I have no political illusion necessarily in them being the Queen or anything like that, but 100% of the lawmakers in the House of Representatives and the Senate are dead against Trump's war on Venezuela. They do it for different reasons, but they don't like it. They said it's a mess, it's going to cause a lot of troubles, it's going to destroy the prestige of the United States internationally, it's going to destroy our alliances with everybody else. This is not good. And we might get into a quagmire there if we go for that. And several retired generals, are on national television every single day, denouncing these things, condemning it, and saying this is not going to work. My understanding of it is that when retired generals, 4-star generals in the United States speak and say what they say, it's because it is the Pentagon that wants somebody to voice what they think. Otherwise, why retired generals are going to be? It's not one, it's several of them. What is interesting about what they say is several things, not only what I just told you, which they disagree completely with the thing, but also they said Venezuela's role in drug trafficking is negligible. They say that themselves. They say, we know that most of the cocaine is produced in Colombia and other places. Venezuela has no contribution. And they say when it comes to fentanyl, I've seen many of them saying it publicly. The contribution of Venezuela is zero, which coincides totally with the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, which produces a report every year. So there is a huge amount of, opposition within the House of Congress and the Senate. There is also a huge amount of opposition among governors of every kind within the United States. And then if you keep going down, then at the level of cities, mayors, and so on, it's really getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But more important, that is beginning to create tensions between Donald Trump and his popular base massively. One example is Marjorie Taylor Greene. She was the most psychophantic pro-Trump person ever, extreme right-winger by any imaginable measure. And yet she's been condemning Trump absolutely strongly because of this. And the key point is that you promised us when we elected you that you will stop these wars that the Democrats have been conducting, since, I don't know, time immemorial, well, ever since George W. Bush and so on. So it's producing this sort of beginning to break up. So linking up and, supporting that process in whichever way we can. I know many others are doing it at the level of state, not necessarily at the level of solidarity campaigns, because we haven't got those connections. But it is happening. And then the amount of demonstrations, the amount of mass mobilizations that have taken place on the question of the attack, the assault on Venezuela in cities in the United States, more than 150 cities mobilized, huge numbers, to say, what is this? What the hell are you think you're doing? No war against anybody, no war against Venezuela, etc. And everybody knows, and if Trump tells you every single time, it's nothing to do with human rights, nothing to do with democracy and so on. It's all about oil. And it's the first time ever that US imperialism does not disguise the reason for attacking a country. And then if you were to look at the rest of Europe and so on, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is what we need to quote. And in the case of Great Britain, to answer the more specific question, what we can do. I think what we can do is, in the case of the UK, what we have done is we issued an emergency motion, the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign, an emergency statement that we ask people for support. Up to yesterday, we have more than 5,000, but things are going dramatically much more than that by now. 5,000. On the first few hours when we put it out, we got more than 1,000 right away. So this is really big. But more important, we got 40 parliamentarians, which is quite substantial. And then more than 8 national secretaries of trade unions in the UK, plus, regional bodies and so on. And then more important that on top of that, if we have the support and we're working together with the anti-war movement, Stop the War Coalition, CND, Labour C, and then everybody else, including collaborating, it's not exactly the same relationship with the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which is gigantic. So we've built a coalition here that is mobilizing quite dramatically, and we're demanding several things. The first one is to oppose and condemn the transaction, which is easy. We got that already, and this is growing. Number 2, we want to demand and put pressure on Prime Minister Keir Starmer that he condemns it. He refuses to do so. Now, our point is this. It is the constitutional, political, and moral responsibility of the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to uphold international law. What Trump has done in Venezuela is a total, clear violation of international law. And the United Kingdom is signatory to the United Nations Charter. So the pressure on him is big, really big. I mean, the discussions in Parliament and so on are, making their life very difficult. And he just even did not come to the debate himself personally. He's somebody else, which is a clear indication. So the more pressure we build up, that's what we're having another picket tomorrow, then the better it is. Then we want to demand the immediate and unconditional release of President Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, immediately. And then, we want to ensure that the United States withdraws its fleet from the Caribbean because it's illegal, it is against international law and should not be there at all, and it's an ominous threat against everybody in the region because Latin America and the Caribbean are zones of peace. So roughly these are the things. And we know that many other campaigns around the world are doing something very similar. So it's got a very clear focus.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. we are going to put the links down below of the website for Venezuelan Solidarity Campaign. So you can check out all that information, get involved if you want to. I am seeing Jesús, editor of Orinoco Tribune, in our studio. So we'll be bringing him up, but I just have one PSA for people that from the global north, I have noticed this trend of people who are rightly condemning U.S. invasion into Venezuela and the kidnapping, but still upholding the myth and the propaganda that it is the US and the UK that is the one that upholds international law. And I just want to make sure that we do not perpetuate these lies, because this is the type of propaganda that allows the US to do 100 documented regime change operations in the last less than 100 years without anyone even noticing, it seems like. They are not the upholders of international law. That's really important. So when we are spreading awareness and getting solidarity, please try not to also, obviously not you, Francisco, and not you, Sara, but audience, please try not to also say, but now what is going to prevent China from invading Taiwan? That is a ridiculous talking point, and that just completely feeds into the US propaganda and escalation against countries in the global south.
Remembering, Ileana, UK together with the USA just bombed a ship in international waters, a Russian ship carrying Venezuela oil. UK was part of the plot. And it's very interesting because when Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, has been asked to condemn Venezuela, and he said, well, I need to establish the facts first. I can't say at face value the obvious. I can't say the obvious. This has been hijacked. He responded voluntarily saying, UK has nothing to do with the strike of Venezuela. Why is he voluntarily saying they have nothing to do? I think they did have something to do. It shows that it puts me question, it gives me pause. Why is he saying this? Nobody asks Starmer whether UK had something to do or not. So I would assume they at least knew about it, that they could have helped with intelligence, like they are helping Palestine with intelligence from their planes coming from Cyprus. And what a surprise. Some days later, the UK is participating in the US in an attack against Russia and Venezuela in international waters, against international law, against maritime law, and against a sovereign country. What a surprise. I wonder what would be the role of Keir Starmer and in this attack on Venezuela. We have to remember Francisco led a campaign, a very big campaign, one of the leaders of the campaign, when the US when UK seized the Venezuela gold in the Bank of England. I think the UK has a huge, immense role in that. Always as a lapdog of the US, but acting in their own interests as well. We see the Assange case. It couldn't be more illustrative of how UK is a collaborator of the Nazi land. I would say we are approaching a Nazi land of the United States of Nazi land.
I mean, I think we can establish that through all these actions that the UK is so much a part of the inner core of US empire. And certainly the dossier that I brought up on screen, the hyper-imperialism tricontinental research dossier, suggests that. But yes, to your point, Sara, that's completely true. Our hands are not clean in the UK. And I think as the public, we just have to, it's a tricky thing, because certainly we don't want to derail the conversation when we are advocating for the demands that Francisco has talked about that will be on the website. We certainly don't want to derail the conversation, right? We don't want to be like, this is happening in Venezuela, but what about all these other things? It's like they are definitely connected, and we have to be able to address that all these things under imperialism will keep on happening. And so this one is particularly urgent. Let's focus and prioritize this, but let's not also add to manufacturing consent for other regime change operations that are bound to be attempted. Now, I'm going to bring on Jesus. I keep Jesús Rodríguez-Espinoza. Sorry, I'm very bad with names, but
Rodríguez.
Sorry,
Rodríguez.
Rodríguez. Okay, sorry. Okay. I'm going to bring him in the studio, and he can correct me as well. But well,
nice to see you. Very nice to see
you too. Nice to see you too, guys.
Everybody knows each other, which is lovely in this like very small world of anti-imperialism. We want this world to be a small world, right? In terms of what we're fighting for. But I'm just going to read out your bio, and then we'll get into a little bit more of this conversation. So Jesus is an expert in international relations, Venezuelan politics, and communication. He served for several years as Consul General of Venezuela in Chicago. That's in the United States. And before that, he was part of the foundational editorial team of Apareo.org. He is the founder and editor of the Venezuelan anti-imperialist news outlet, Orinoco Tribune. So welcome. And also all links will be in the description.
Thank you for the invitation, guys.
Directly from Caracas, I understand.
Yes, absolutely. And we remain here until we expel those gringos out of our shores.
Yes, in solidarity, definitely. So, we have been talking about this from outside of Venezuela. Quite obviously our view is that Francisco is talking about how the sentiment in Venezuela itself is certainly not what is being portrayed through social media in like the global north. So in the US, there's a lot of footage about supposedly Venezuelans celebrating the kidnapping of President Maduro. It turns out that a lot of those people were actually in Florida, but there was a conflation between the two. We're not seeing the same sort of things coming out of Venezuela, but you're in Caracas, aren't you? So please, can you give us a sense of the reality on the ground? And also, just out of my curiosity, because the last time you came onto Global Majority for Peace, you talked about the 6 million Bolivarian militia. And can you sort of explain how this all factors in and give an overview to the audience?
Yes, first of all, Caracas is already back to normal in terms of, day-to-day life. Extremely important to highlight that Venezuela is not paralyzed or anything like that. And the government has been trying has been asking us to do that, to do not paralyze. And from the other side, you don't see far-right people protesting in the street of Caracas or any other city in Venezuela celebrating, the kidnapping of President Maduro. Of course, there will be. We have far-right people in Venezuela the same way you have far-right people up there in the UK or anywhere in the world. So there's people that is happy and celebrating, but they are the minority, if you ask me. I have talked with opposition people, with people that hate Maduro and Chavez and Chavismo, and the majority of them were also in shock and disgusted by the U.S. attacks. And it's important to highlight that because some people, as you mentioned, believe that there is a massive celebrations in Venezuela, when in reality the celebration that has been broadcasted are celebrations in Florida or Chile or Madrid. So that's the reality here. And along with that, we have seen since Saturday, and for 4 days already in straight day. I don't know how to say in English. We have seen demonstrations for the last 4 days in Venezuela in support of President Maduro, demanding the arrival of the return of President Maduro, and opposing and denouncing the U.S. strikes. So we have seen since the very first day, since Saturday, there were already street actions in Caracas and other cities, and that scene has been growing. And I believe that tomorrow there will be a massive demonstration in Caracas. Somehow mixing all the other demonstration that has been happening over the week. Uh, in the same vein, denouncing the kidnapping of our president.
Jesus,
Great.
I have a question for you. We saw last year in the elections of 2024 that Brazil, the 10th economy in the world, the largest country in South America, has not recognized Maduro as a president. Then we have Brazil not allowing Venezuela to get into the BRICS. Would you agree with the opinion that Brazil has contributed to isolate Venezuela, to make Venezuela more vulnerable, that President Lula has had a foreign policy that needs to be reviewed, in particularly considering Venezuela and the Latin American integration, and that Brazil is in a way responsible for Venezuela being so isolated and vulnerable? Would you agree with that?
I kind of agree with that. Absolutely. I mean, it's a complicated question anyway, because you have to balance between all the far right, center, and far left or left governments in the region. And of course, when you see the bigger picture, you realize that Lula or Petro are the lesser, or Sheinbaum in Mexico are the lesser evil if you compare them with Milei or Boric or I just was reading a statement yesterday by the new allegedly progressive Uruguayan president talking nonsense about President Maduro, and it's important to highlight that there is this narrative, this campaign of lies launched against President Maduro that have demonized him even in the eyes of so-called leftist people. But going back to the question, I just want to say that I was reading just before entering the interview the statement Lula released on yesterday on X, mentioning that he talked with President Petro but he wants Venezuelans to decide on their future. And when I read that part, that exploded in my head, because that's the narrative, same narrative that is used by Petro also to get into Venezuelan internal affairs and somehow complaining or criticizing our 2024 presidential elections with this narrative that Maduro won those elections by fraud. And that is a narrative that has been destroying or at least that has been used to destroy Chavismo since the very beginning. It's not new. That happened also against President Chavez, and it's happening against President Maduro. But I believe that in the case of President Maduro, it has moved forward because President Maduro do not have or did not have the same level of charisma that Chavez had. So in that sense, the best things that we can do as people that really knows what happened in Venezuela is to counter as much as we can those lies about Venezuela being a dictatorship and that Maduro won the election by fraud and those things that are big lies. Just listening to the crazy statement of President Trump saying that Maria Corina Machado will not be the leader of the transition in Venezuela because she don't have internal support is the biggest clue to understand the reality. If she won the 2024 elections against Maduro, if she really won those elections, she would have been immediately appointed by President Trump to rule Venezuela, or whatever he says about the U.S. controlling Venezuela, which is a lie. But anyway, so it's extremely important, and that fact about the U.S. realizing that Maria Corina Machado or her, surrogate candidate Edmundo Gonzalez do not have support in Venezuela.
I have to say, as a Brazilian, I would just like to add that as a Brazilian, I feel incredibly ashamed of Brazilian foreign politics toward our hermanos, our brother Venezuelans. I'd like to apologize in name of many Brazilians for the horrible, despicable Brazilian foreign policy towards Venezuela of isolation, recrimination, and in a very subtle way, but still Brazil is the largest country in Latin America, and Brazil should have helped and embraced Venezuela, should not have been reproducing the lines of the empire, because I think Brazilian foreign policy is still a baby when it comes to imperialism. I think Lula is very naive regarding the US. He thinks he can talk his way out with Trump. He can be talking friendly and that will sort out the problem. They have not understand the need of a dissuasion of, possibly even investing in defense mechanisms that dissuades the US of invading.
And the risk, and also the risk for Brazil and Colombia, if they keep that line, eventually the US will go after them.
Can I come in?
Yes, I wanted also, Francisco, because I know you said that you were an international observer in the 2024 elections. Can you say that as well? I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but also to clarify for the audience this very dangerous narrative that Maduro is a dictator and the elections were fraudulent. Can you give some insight into that as well?
Yeah. I mean, what do you think a dictator like Pinochet would do to an opposition such as Juan Guaido? He would not survive 2 seconds. The guy is still around, did whatever he did, went to demonstrations and so on. How many political parties there are of the opposition in Venezuela? All of them. Sometimes they want to participate, sometimes they don't want to participate. That's their problem. Who controls the media, most of the media in Venezuela? The opposition. You pick up any newspaper, of the opposition. There are plenty of them. And they'll all say whatever they want, literally every single day. I will challenge the opposition, the audience. Please go to a website and pick up any right-wing newspaper in Venezuela, which is produced in Venezuela, and you will see there is no essentials whatsoever. And then 33 elections. And the Chavistas lost 2. What is interesting is that the opposition, every time he lost an election, claimed fraud, but never presented any form of complaint nor evidence. They went to the media. And on the occasions when Chavismo lost the elections, which was, the first one was in 2007 and the second one was 2015, particularly 2015 was very bad, where the opposition nearly won 2/3 of the National Assembly within minutes of the results. In the first occasion, 2007, Chavez recognized the result, and in the second occasion, in 2015, Maduro, within 1 hour, recognized the results immediately, except the opposition every single time. So far, if you look at the National Electoral Council, there's been not a single formal complaint lodged by the opposition regarding fraud. That's number one. And number two, Venezuela has the best electoral system in the world. And there is impossible, I've been on the survey not only once in Venezuela, but several times. No matter how much you try, it's just literally impossible. In 2024, I think they had a plan to attack cybernetically the electoral system by destroying it. And the intention was to ensure there will be no results. And with no results, Then they will claim fraud, saying the government is hiding the actual results. And then they will go for the violence, which is what they did. It's totally clear. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever to justify. On the question of Brazil, in my sense, to continue to be stuck on this issue is quite frankly not productive. When President Maduro was inaugurated on the 10th of January 2025, I was invited to the inauguration. Brazil sent a special envoy to recognize the inauguration. Even better, Venezuela sent an ambassador after the original problems that were created with the actors in the election. Venezuela sent an ambassador which was received and welcomed and recognized with the credentials by Brazil. But let's add more to it. In the last 3 days, I think it was 3 days ago, Spain, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Uruguay issued a very, very strong condemnation statement of the attack by the United States on Venezuela. So this is really what the issue is right now. And the important thing here is Pedro Sanchez from Spain. I've never doubted Lula, that he was going to take the right side. But it's interesting.
Well,
Let me finish the point. Because Pedro Sanchez, because I'm not interested in discussing, the internal politics of the left in Brazil. We're interested in defending Venezuela today, which is what we want. The importance of Pedro Sanchez participating in this joint statement is the fact that it's breaking away the right-wing unity of the European Union, which is crucial, because the United States without the European Union is very politically isolated, and that's substantial, because they've been their accomplices for the last whatever period, 27 years. And the very fact that, he's refused to accept it because he's got a coalition that he's got to defend in Spain is quite significant. So it's very important to actually concentrate on these questions. So therefore, what is posed is to ensure that, we understand what the crucial questions are, not secondary questions which only complicate matters.
I mean, I think that's an important point, and we should be prioritizing the forefront of what is really the most urgent at the moment. But I think to Sarah's point, though, just to be contrary, Francisco, is just that we also, and maybe you might say this might not be the right time to sort of perpetuate this, but this is a discussion, right, that we can have sort of like where it's sort of knowing the global south and all the countries in the global south do have this problem of how do you appease the US and also stand up for your own country. And there are certain countries that have been able to strive for sovereignty much more successfully, like Venezuela, than other countries. And granted, Lula is in a very precarious position in many ways, as evidence from his own history. So it's quite difficult, and I think we can acknowledge that. But I also think that it would do us a disservice not to also examine the points in which he could perhaps stand up more forcefully.
Yeah. This is a very important question in Brazil about their national foreign policies. Today, they are followed by Mauro Vieira, who has been taking very discreet positions on Brazilian sovereignty and has been doing no advances in the Latin American integration. So we do have a shift here. And this is one of Brazilians' main problems. If Lula committed a mistake, it was definitely this one, in particular of Venezuela. We need strongly to review. And there's been calling everywhere in Brazil from the progressive forces for Lula to review its foreign policies. Brazil is a very relevant country in the Latin American and in the global south. We have a very important president recognized everywhere. So it's extremely crucial that Brazil takes the right steps looking forward. It's not looking back. It's looking forward what I'm talking about. And as Kissinger said, what happens in Brazil will happen everywhere in Latin America. We need to keep eyes on Brazil. And Brazil was, according to the Snowden files, the second country most surveilled by the US for a reason. Let's go now with Jesús. Ileana, I think you have a question.
But Brazil has done the right thing on this particular crisis, which is really good.
I was saying
he has done. But he has done the right thing. And that's good for us. Lula called for an emergency CELAC meeting. I mean, what else do you want? You want Brazil to declare war to the United States?
I think Brazil should have Venezuela into the BRICS and should have recognized their legitimate election of Maduro. These are things Brazil should have done, and they haven't. They have challenged Venezuela.
Listen, let me add my point of view from Caracas. I believe that what Francisco say about Brazil doing the right things is important. A few right things. For example, sending this insulin to Venezuela a few hours ago was extremely important, and that has been recognized by us Venezuelans, and also by the government that is now led by Jesús Rodríguez. But going back to the statement that Francisco mentioned, when you read that statement carefully, you notice that there are several paragraphs there that replicate the same narrative of, let's the Venezuelan decide by themselves, let's move into that transition. And one have to be critical of that. I'm happy because of the statement, because it put the point on the issue, the most important issue, that is sovereignty, but they kind of matizar, we say in Spanish, that, how do you say it in English?
Nuance.
Exactly, with these claims of lack of democracy and those things. So for that reason, I share your perspective of being critic without pushing Lula or Petro towards the other side, because that might also when you push someone too much, he might decide that he hates you and he will embrace the opposite side stronger than our side. So one have to be careful with that, but one also have to be critical,
Yeah, Brazil had a left-wing government that did something absolutely unusual for our tradition of Itamaraty, which is the foreign policy, which they actively discredit Venezuela internal presidential elections, saying they need to see the results for themselves in order to accept Maduro as a president. So this is called meddling in Venezuela international affairs. They could not point out any fraud because, as Francisco said, Venezuela's system is absolutely watertight in these terms, much more than the American one. And Brazil never asked for American files in order to say that Trump was the president. Why we're asking for Maduro? And when Brazil is such a relevant country, is in this position as a left-wing government and progressive government, is criticizing and questioning Venezuela's results, we are meddling, just like the US, just like Europe and everything else. And this is to condemn, Francisco. We need to be very strong about it. It's a huge mistake of the Lula government. And we need to review this foreign policy if we want a sovereign Latin America and not as a backyard.
Just one very small point. You cannot say that Brazil is meddling like the United States and Europe. This is completely, out of the...
In this point...
Let me finish my point. It's completely out of bounds with reality. Come on, you cannot say Brazil is the same as the United States and the European Union.
When they criticize the election, they are meddling, just like the others saying it's not.
It's not the same. The intention of the United States and the European Union is to overthrow the government by violent means. Brazil may have made tactical mistakes by accommodating, but you cannot say it's the same. It's completely ridiculous charge.
They were meddling, and they are meddling when they
My
say.
point is it's ridiculous to compare that they are the same. Brazil is not an imperialist country that is intended to overthrow the Venezuelan government, for God's sake.
You were
mean,
shifting
I would just say,
words. That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say it's a semantic issue here. I do agree with Francisco that meddling suggests an active participation in the interference. But what I would say is that Brazil upheld the propaganda that the U.S. is using to manufacture consent around the destabilization, which is really my point, before, is that when we're advocating for Venezuela, do not inadvertently manufacture consent by spreading the propaganda of like Maduro's a dictator, but the U.S. should not, and I think to Jesus's point in the letter, they shouldn't be bringing up this idea of democracy when there's nothing wrong with the elections, so there is definitely not complicity. I don't think it rises to that level, but there is definitely a contribution to manufacturing of consent here by Brazil's stance in that. I say I don't think it rises to the level of meddling because that suggests participation in interference. And I don't think that's your point, right, Sara? But if we could sort of move on to...
I think the point is that Brazil is interfering in a sovereign country when they demand to see the full electoral results in order to recognize the president. There is no backing in international law whatsoever, and they are applying the exact same method that Europe has applied in this election in Venezuela and that the US applied in this election in Venezuela. They are replicating the same strategy of isolating Maduro and blaming him as dictator. They are interfering in Venezuela sovereignty when they say we want to see the full results, otherwise we are not going to recognize you as a president. Brazil has never acted this way in any country in the world, not with Saudi Arabia, not to dictators around the world. And they are doing this with Venezuela. I do think it's an act of interference in the Venezuela sovereignty.
I don't want to continue with the polemic, but I think we should move on to the crucial question here is a massive imperialist attack on Venezuela, not the subtleties of Brazilian complications. It's about Venezuela. It's about the U.S. imperialism that is going to attack everybody else. I think we are deviating from the main purpose of this conversation.
Yes, I mean, I don't want us to get into a semantic thing. You're right, because I think it's a little bit about really the more we uncover about U.S. imperialism, it's just they're on the ground affecting things, and that's how that's a very active type of interference. So I think when we use those terms, we're really talking about that sort of imperialism, which I'm not seeing that Brazil is necessarily doing in this case. But sort of to expand on this conversation while not derailing us completely, but the thing is, there is a lot like this sentiment of looking at Brazil, looking at other countries. I think in the global north, because we often feel very powerless, there tends to be like this thing of blaming perhaps China or Russia, who are key allies to Venezuela. We're hearing that a lot, where there's a lot of frustration and anger in the global north. And they're basically people like, why isn't China and Russia acting? And we have to point out that China and Russia is used as scapegoats in the West for every single thing that ever happens. But it permeates the public's view of China and Russia on both ends. And so I kind of want to ask you, Jesus, about the sentiment from Venezuela. What is your view of how the Venezuelan people view this type of thing? And also, what do you actually think your key allies can do? What would be the most effective things in your view that they can be doing?
First of all, I want to say that we have been saying for months since this aggression from the U.S. began, that we did not expect, China or Russia to send troops or, to send us hypersonic missiles and things like that to defend ourselves. We were not expecting that because the war scenario is, for the last decades, extremely different from how it was like in the 20th century. So in that sense, I understand the stance of China and Russia, and I'm extremely critic also of those ones, even among the left, criticizing China for not doing more, or criticizing Russia for not doing more, and allowing the gringos to bomb us. So I want to be very clear on that, but to be extremely frank, I feel as a Venezuelan that maybe they could have done something more, or maybe we should have a request in a better way, in a more smart way, to China and Russia to prepare us, or to give us the technology to try to be better prepared for military incursion like the one we saw on Saturday. So, but I don't blame Russia or China for that. I believe that it's also our responsibility as Venezuelans to do that.
Jesus,
Francisco, go ahead.
Can you tell us a little bit about Delcy Rodriguez? There is what looks like CIA talking points that Delcy Rodriguez.
Before we move on to that, Sara, can I just get a comment from Francisco about, is there anything that you feel, or if you don't want to add to this because you don't want to derail the conversation, but is there anything you feel that China and Russia is doing or can be doing in this scenario?
Well, if China or Russia were to send troops, that would be a third world war right away, and it would be nuclear. So it's understandable that they have to, act with caution, because when it comes to international politics, when we are individuals in little organizations, we can say, well, whatever we want, and it has no consequences, no responsibility. When it comes to states, and in these tense international contexts, they have to really be extremely careful and very precise, because the most important thing regarding foreign policy at this level, in this tense situation, is what the experts call miscalculation. If you miscalculate and do more or less than you should do, then the other side is going to respond. And that is why they had the red telephone, in the White House and the Soviet Union at the time, to ensure that before they did anything, they talked to each other. So this is just beginning. The Chinese and the Russians are going to start. They facilitated several discussions in the Security Council of the United Nations, where Venezuela was able to actually put forward quite substantial accusation charges and got significant political victories out of that. That's number one. Number two, China condemned completely and unequivocally the attack on Venezuela and demanded the immediate release of President Maduro and Celia Flores. That's a very, very good platform to actually start with. And I wouldn't be surprised, I do not know this necessarily at this stage, but I wouldn't be surprised if China and Russia begin to organize things around the place to ensure that they, continue or expand the isolation of the United States on this question, because it's going to blow up in the face of Trump. He thinks he's done something very smart. It's not going to go well for him. There is danger in this situation. So China has remained, just met, the Chinese special envoy from the foreign minister, met Delcy Rodriguez to discuss in detail a lot of things, I imagine. I can't imagine what they did. So that is important. And I think the Russians have been extremely vocal regarding their support for the global south. On this one, they also have been very, very sharp in the discussions in the United Nations, in the Security Council, not once, several times. So I think, to me, the context being created by them, which in the circumstances will contribute to create a context where they can do something more substantial than what they are doing right now.
And before we move on to the Delcy Rodriguez thing, because I think a lot of people are very curious about the smears against her, the U.S. propaganda smears against her. I do just want to expand a little bit more about this narrative that Trump is, again, in his press conference, just following it, I think on January 3rd, actually, he told taxpayers the U.S. will get reimbursed for everything that we spend, noting that the money coming out of the ground is very substantial. We'll have the greatest oil companies in the world going in, invest billions and billions of dollars, and the biggest beneficiary are going to be the people of Venezuela. I mean, obviously, this is completely ridiculous. However, I do just want to tease out the importance of oil, not just as this colonial style resource extraction that Trump is announcing, but in the wider geopolitical imperial agenda against Russia and China. And so just how important is the oil in terms of that sort of development for Venezuela, obviously, but also just the geopolitical power shifting. I know that China, I think, is importing a lot of oil from Venezuela, but it's just 4% of their overall oil imports. Can you sort of expand on this?
Yes, me.
Go ahead, Francisco. I can.
Questions for Jesus, because he barely had the chance to talk. Jesus, you come first.
Thank you. I believe that it's evident when you listen to President Trump that the real reason behind everything that we have seen for the last months is oil. I read an analysis somewhere where they say that in that Saturday press conference that they held in the White House after bombing Venezuela, he mentioned oil 27 times. So that gives you an idea on what is the real interest behind, and a lot of people are realizing that, not only in Venezuela or Latin America or Europe, in the US also. So it's more than evident that the whole interest of the US is oil, and he's making these crazy statements and victory statements just to appease and to portray himself as the victor, like the, I don't know how you say that in English, but the victory person, the person that won, for that reason, he said weird things like the U.S. will control Venezuelan oil, that they will get 50 million barrels of oil, and he will manage that money. He has been saying. We are accustomed to Trump to listen, those kind of statement from Trump's mouth, but he's just. We have to understand that he's directing most of those statements to the U.S. audience and his base support, because he wants to win the midterm elections that are going to happen soon. So, in that sense, everything is clear, at least for us here. What we need to do is that's what we have been trying to do, is try to let the world know that we are in control, and that the U.S. is not going to do whatever they want with Venezuela or with the Venezuelan oil. Going back to the relationship with China and in the oil field or the U.S., it's important to mention that the last figure that I saw was that we were exporting somewhere between 500 or 800 million barrels to China, at least in recent years, and the number of barrels that we have been sending to the U.S. is around 200,000 barrels, not million, sorry, 200,000 barrels daily to the U.S. thanks to the Chevron, agreements that we have. So that gives you an idea on how is the balance in terms of the oil market. But the most important thing here is that Venezuela have deals with a lot of countries, not only with China. We have deals with China. I mean, there are Chinese companies operating with PDVSA to exploit Venezuelan oil, but we also have same agreements with Vietnam, with Italy, with Spain, with Russia, and also with the US. And we always have said that the US can have, oil negotiations and all deals with PDVSA, with us, but in conditions of respect and mutual benefit. So that's what I could say about your question, Ileana.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. Do you have anything to add to that, Francisco, in terms of what you're seeing? You mentioned Delcy meeting with a Chinese official. Do you have anything to, well, I guess I'm asking you to predict the future, which you certainly can't, but an indication of what this kind of the geopolitical shifting will be now? Obviously, the US just wants to cut off Venezuela from all these partnerships that Jesus is talking about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on the oil, to come back to that point because it's relevant. It takes 40 to 45 days from the oil of the Middle East to reach the United States. It takes only 4 days from Venezuela. And because of the mess that the United States has created in the Middle East, which is a war, it's chaos, wars and so on, at some point, that's what they fear, the strategists, the supply of oil might be interrupted from the Middle East. And if that were to happen, it would be catastrophic from the point of view of energy, industry, and so on in the United States. So therefore, they want to ensure that they control the supply of oil from Venezuela. And rather than negotiate with Venezuela, good deals and so on, which Venezuela would be in favor of, they rather have it in the military fashion, like gangsters. And that is what is complicating things. And what they want to do is to ensure that they get the oil at the price they want. At the time Chavez came to office in 1999, the barrel of oil was $7. Because Chavez strengthened OPEC right away as soon as he came in something like 8 months, the barrel of oil went up to 22 and then went up to 27, which meant huge amount of revenue coming into the country and so which financed the social program. I think it's too premature to draw too many conclusions about China not doing much. The reason is this. The attack on Venezuela and what the United States is doing by withdrawing from 65 United Nations bodies, which means the United States going solo, isolationist. But isolation is in order to attack the world, to dominate it and shape it in its own way against everybody to ensure that they remain supreme. So that's the danger. I'm convinced that China is not going to accept this. The Russians are not going to accept this. The Europeans are on the floor because of the US foreign policy of Donald Trump. And the European Union is beginning to fragment. So what is at stake is quite gigantic. So the oil is one part of it. The crucial part of it is multipolarity, which I don't believe there is an automatic consequence by multipolarity destroying the empire. That's not going to happen. However, the existence of multipolarity and the expansion of multipolarity at which China is central, which means de-dollarization, which means opportunities of investment, credit, technology, and markets for the global south, which is what China wants. This is not going to end. And all this is done as plays a serious danger on the expansion of multipolarity. If the countries that are in favor of multipolarity, particularly China, Russia, and others, allow the United States to get away without any consequences negative for them, then the United States continue expanding these anywhere else. And the next one will be obviously Taiwan. Trump has just announced, and this is important part because if we're noticing it, these powers I'm talking about are noticing as well. Trump suggested to increase the military budget from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. That is a 50% increase, which is a clear indication He wants war. That's what it is. So to think, I can say sort of irresponsibly that China is not going to do anything about it, or Russia or others are not going to do anything about it, it's just ridiculous. They will do. We do not know exactly how they're going to do it and how much they're going to do. They have loads of levers in their hands at the international level. The external debt of the United States, they have, the mechanisms of the BRICS, they have this Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they have loads of mechanisms. They have the what is called the Belt and Road Initiative, which is gigantic. None of this is going to end. So there will be significant complications now. And the United States, even the Trump administration, becoming isolated within the United States itself, because the other section of the bourgeoisie is coming to the conclusion, what do we do now? Okay, suppose we get Venezuela, what do we do now? What's next? We're going to attack Brazil, attack Nicaragua, and so on. How far can we go with this, without having consequences? So it seems to me it's not sustainable.
Listen, I just want to add something in relation to this, which is that the whole issue with the oil tankers, that's an important issue, and it's connected to what we are talking, because most of those tankers are either aim at China and Russia, and we have seen since December this naval blockade against Venezuela, and the intention of that blockade is to strangle Venezuelan oil production mainly. So that and I believe that because of these U.S. actions that some people say that are acts of piracy, China and Russia will also respond eventually in a same way to try to retaliate the money that they have been losing, because it's not the seizing of the oil tankers themselves. It's the issue that in those oil tankers there are millions of barrels of oil, and we are talking about millions of dollars of money that were seized by the U.S. So it's important to mention that, because that's part of the equation, and it's part of the U.S. speech or narrative about Venezuelan doing deals with them. Actually, Venezuela announced a few days ago that PDVSA is doing some negotiations with the U.S. To sell more oil, because our stocks are getting higher, and you cannot have infinite stock of oil in your country, because at least Venezuela do not have that capacity, and many countries do not have that capacity. And if we reach that peak of holding oil, and the pumping of oil will stop, and that will be terrible, because that will affect the whole oil pumping in Venezuela. I just wanted to add that.
It's a really good context. Thank you. Just one thing about just to clarify for the audience, the Trump's wanting to increase the military budget to 1.5 trillion, as you were saying, Francisco. Monthly Review had a report a few years ago that their official military budget of 800 billion was actually in actuality 1.4 trillion. Goodness. So an official budget of 1.5 trillion. What is the official, what is the actual reality of their budget? It could be over 2 trillion, it's insane amounts that we can't even imagine. But yes, and now we can go. Sara, you had a really, really pertinent question about Delcy. If you could take it away.
Yeah, I will put two questions for our guests. The first one, Jesús touched upon a very important point. He's saying we'll come to a point where Russia and China will respond to their losses. So we've seen in 1962, under the missile crisis in Cuba, that right after the Cuban Revolution, the US was threatening and invading Cuba. Time after time, they failed at the Bahía de los Porcos, and to protect Cuba, we had Russia installing instead putting an installation of nuclear missiles that would reach the US in a few minutes. So don't try to come in here. And so President Kennedy at the time reacted and put a naval blockage in Cuba, and we were about to be in a nuclear war. In the end, there was a deal which Russia pushed the US to a deal. We're going to remove the missiles and you will not invade Cuba. So this is during the Cold World War. Russia said we are going to invade, we will invade Turkey if you invade Cuba, and Turkey will look like a parking lot if you invade. And then US was dissuaded of invading Cuba, and until today, the revolution Cuban is resisting. So we know Russia doesn't have the capacity to do that today. China may have, but is this still the type of response in a multipolar world? What would look like the response of China and Russia towards this US aggression by proxy in a way, because it's about China not getting it's much more about China not getting the oil than the US getting the oil, which is going to be difficult again. So this is my question for both of you. What would look like this response? And the second one, I'd like you guys to talk a little bit about who is Delcy, her biography, and will she be trading?
Let's address that one first. Let's address that one first. It's a pretty big question.
Will Delcy trade oil
Sarah,
for power? I'm just finishing the question. Will Delcy trade oil for power? I'll give you some oil so that the revolution can carry on. So for both of you, those two questions. Yeah.
I will go with the one first, with the part about Delcy, because I believe that is extremely important. Because as the same way they has been demonizing Maduro and before him Chavez, they has been in the last hours trying to demonize Delcy. But it's a different demonization, because I actually believe that many friends of us in the left progressive movement has been falling into that trap of claiming that Jesús Rodríguez did some sort of back channel negotiations with the U.S. and that yes, and that because of that, President Maduro is in New York. It's like forgetting what actually happened and what the facts are showing. President Maduro did not took a plane, a commercial flight to New York, and ended up in a prison in Manhattan or in Brooklyn. I mean, he was kidnapped, and it's extremely important to say that. And 100 Venezuelans die because of that U.S. military operation, and it's extremely absurd to believe that this happened because there was a back channel negotiation or a treason or something. And the issue of a treason is incredible to not have legs itself, because I mean, whenever you see, since the very beginning of this crisis, whenever you see a President Jesús Rodríguez having a meeting or being in a ceremony, you see her accompanied with all the leadership of Chavismo and all the leadership of the Venezuelan state. I'm talking about the military. I'm talking about the parliament. I'm talking about all the ministers that has been working with Maduro for the last year. So it's absurd to believe that Jesús Rodríguez was part of a treason plot to try to deliver Maduro to U.S. authorities. And another important thing to say about that is that I forgot what I wanted to say, so you can jump in, Francisco. I forgot my line of thought. That's terrible.
Okay.
When that happened.
No, sure. President Maduro for many, many years, he insisted he was prepared to engage in dialogue and negotiation with the United States again and again and again and again and again. Anything was open to discussion. And Chavez was similar, not identical, but similar. Because when Chavez was around, Venezuela was very strong. When Maduro was around, Venezuela was weak. So obviously the tone and everything is different. Nevertheless, all countries, including Cuba, would like to have a normal relationship with the United States rather than confrontation all the time. So dialogue is preferable. Fidel had, lines of communication for all the years he was in charge with the United States all the time, absolutely all the time. So there's nothing surprising about this. That's number one. So that he would like to have and maintain those lines of communication with whoever it is that is, close to the presidency of the United States make total sense. That's the second point. The third point is this: I've read some of the conspiracies. They're just so ridiculous, quite frankly. This is what it will signify. If the PSUV, political party of Chavismo, the Grand Patriotic Front, the armed forces, and all the state apparatus took a decision to surrender to the United States by electing somebody who is going to be an asset of the United States. It's just totally nonsensical. The unity and everything was to ensure that there was constitutional continuity, and she was the vice president. And she's the vice president not because of accident. They come from a very long tradition of a very radical family. Her father was assassinated for being a revolutionary, back in the time of the Fourth Republic. He was really assassinated, and they were kids, and the two of them were participating in the Socialist League, which was a Marxist organization, and they have this training, and it's 27 years of Chavismo that trained them as leadership cadres. So there is absolutely not an inch, not a shred of truth that this is the case. What really irritates me, and I'm not saying that you, Sara, are doing it, because you're telling us what others are saying. What irritates me is, people who are supposedly serious in the left, who should know better, they just draw very, very rapid conclusions, which are not very well thought out. And they just pump this stuff without any problem. And you just say, of course she's an asset. And where does it come from? If you trace where that conspiracy theory comes from, you end up in Washington every single time. So that's the key. So therefore, don't accuse Jesús Rodríguez of crimes she has not committed. Only when and if she does it, then do something about it and say something about it. But before she does anything, she hasn't done anything. All she's done is to say, we restore normality, I'm in charge, we're going to start putting things together and see how we confront the period that is coming to us, which is very dangerous. That's all she's done. She's done nothing else. And all the statements she's made, we want the president back, we're not going to be coming from outside, we're going to resist, and we're going to reorganize and so on. But at the same time, we're going to get in negotiations to, bid for time. Perfect.
Yeah, I just want to add to that it's the same narrative that is being used against China and Brazil. I found them extremely similar. They are trying to break, unity. They are trying to break, in the case of DLC, the internal unity, but also the international support to Chavismo. And in the case of China and Russia, they are trying to break, the unity of global South countries, which is extremely important also. So we need to fight that, and we need to counter that. And of course, we need to do that providing information. And as Francisco said, DLC was the vice president, not because of a formula. In the case of Venezuela, we don't have those presidential and vice presidential formulas or elections. The president is the one that chose his vice president, and Zed Rodríguez was chosen by Maduro, even during these crazy months that we have been living in Venezuela, that we were sure that something like this was going to happen. So President Maduro knew very clear that if something happened to him, Delcy Rodriguez was going to be the next in line, because that's what our constitution says. I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I just want to just bring this point home before moving on, Sarah, or moving back to your original question. Just because this article that I have here on the screen, the U.S. propaganda campaign to smear Venezuela's new president, Delcy Rodriguez, the first sentence on this is something: the U.S. regime change operation against Venezuela has been defeated. And I think this is a really important thing to clarify. What you're both saying, there is a continuity of the current Maduro's government, in this move to have her as interim president. And that's really important, because the way that the Western media is spinning this entire thing, suggesting that Trump is the one that has, the BBC even reported that why Trump chose Maduro's VP over a Nobel winner. This is just one outlet. Like every single mainstream media outlet, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, even Democracy Now! Is suggesting that interim president Delcy Rodriguez is like a CIA plant of some sort. And this is extremely, as you're saying, it is propaganda. It is there to suggest that this regime change has succeeded. And so I just wanted to put that point, knock it over the head again before moving on. Go ahead, Sarah.
No, good. I think it's a great point. I mean, saying that the fee is a asset or has entered into negotiations with Washington is to say that the revolution has failed. And I think it's alive and well. And the fact that you don't have a civil war in Venezuela and everything is going as normal, it just goes to show how strong the Chavista revolution is, how deep the heart is, how the genius of our time managed to do a revolution of minds and the heart. I think we're hitting our time, but I don't know if we should roll the last questions for our guests. Or if you want to carry on longer.
I don't have a problem. I mean, with time. So I can.
I have a problem with time, but I might be leaving after the next questions. But yeah, Ileana, so I think we can carry on this conversation a little bit longer.
No, I mean, I think we've really covered all the questions that we wanted to pose. I mean, I think just to leave us and the audience from this conversation is, again, Francisco did talk about what we can be doing individually, but also to hear from Jesus as well. Francisco, you can also summarize what you want us to be doing as individuals. And also, Jesus, if you can also add to that, what can we be doing from outside Venezuela?
Yes, I hear part of what Francisco said, and I agree with him. You need to do the regular, battery of things that, grassroots organizations do in these kind of situations, like protests and sending letters here and there. But I personally believe that we need to transcend that, and that we need to do something more disruptive in order to change not only the status quo in relation to Venezuela, but also to change things inside the country we live. And I direct this call usually to my audience in the US, but I believe that is the same thing in the UK. I mean, you are not going to end imperialism with protests or with letters to your parliamentarians. I believe that we are not going to do too much. Of course, we can pressure, we can show public opinion, a big mass of people, and we can pressure some politicians here and there. But the system is a monster, and the system is gonna eat us if we don't do something different, and if we don't figure out a different approach to try to solve these issues. And that's why I call for more disruptive actions. I'm not calling for terrorism or something like that. I'm just thinking that we need to think about this more disruptive thing. For example, boycott, divest, and divert operations might help in the case of Venezuela if we continue with this trend. More radical protests, trying to target those corporations that are, financing and moving, because at the end of the day, the politicians are just puppets, especially in the north. And they just respond to the interests of the corporations, and we need to know that politicians do not think by themselves most of the time. They just respond to the pressure of the oligarchies in the US and in the UK and most of Europe. So we need to understand that, and we need to find a different alternative to try to do more, or try to do things in a different way. I know that it's not an easy task, but we need to try to figure out how to do it. That's what I would add to what Francisco suggested.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. I'm going to go back to Francisco, because, I mean, you have been talking to different solidarity campaigns this whole week. What is your response then? What can we do?
I mean, what Jesus is suggesting is desirable. But, practically, given the relational forces in Latin America, which is deteriorating, and the relational forces in Europe, which is also deteriorating, Asia and so on is different. It is desirable. I wonder how far we can go. I did a research some time ago, which was, very numbers only. And I came with the figure of something like 400 MPs of the left in national parliaments in Europe, in the European Union. 423, I think the figure was. And I remember suggesting to various people that it would be a good idea to get one of them on behalf of their group in a particular national parliament in Europe to be interviewed by Telesur or Venezolana de Televisión, so that they could say what they think about things and so on. Then I suggested, these first layer could go down to, what you call a state parliament, at the level of regions such as in Spain and federal system. Then you could go to mayors. Then you could go to councillors. And if you were to do that for a couple of months, which would be not much in terms of work, it would require some organization. You have a huge amount of support, gigantic. What we do have now, because we are not going to individuals who are progressive or public influence, rather than in small groups, then I don't think it's that effective. It's necessary, and it's effective to some degree, but not that effective, because what we want to do, particularly now in Europe, is to mobilize those forces both in the streets, at the level of trade unions, as well as at the level of parliament, to ensure that we put pressure on prime ministers or presidents. And however imperfect was the joint resolution, Spain, Brazil, and others, at least we got one European who broke ranks, and that is significant in itself. This can be replicated in some. So that's number one. This is what we have done in the UK. We got 40 parliamentarians. We got 8 national trade unions. I think it's 10 by now, which represent a huge amount of support. We got the GUC to actually issue a statement, which it did. And then we're mobilizing, through contacts here, not only us, we're not doing everything. I don't want to blame too much. But certainly we are aware that, international trade unions, international confederations, not only the communist-led one, but, many of the others, ITUC and TUCA, for example, have issued a statement We're trying to get stemming from United States trade unions. The more of that debate, we're mobilizing lawyers, association of lawyers of various kinds. We have in the UK the Aldane Society, which is a socialist society of lawyers, which actually, produce a very, very extraordinarily good statement. So the more of that you do, the whole thing should be pointed towards, in our case in the UK, towards Keir Starmer. Because on the one hand, he upholds international law when it comes to Greenland, but he's not prepared to do it when it comes to Venezuela. And his proper, his own, the members of his own party in Parliament have been extremely critical at the debates in Parliament. We're making his life quite uncomfortable, not us, but everybody else, to the point he's even failed to turn up to the debate. So this is where we can change public opinion. And in the process, we're able to clarify so many things. For example, loads of people now, loads and loads, and I have direct contact with those people myself because I do meetings everywhere, are prepared to accept our narrative regarding the fact that Venezuela is not a narco state. They are prepared to listen and produce the documents. Then you can tell more and more and more. That article by Stan Smith, I know him personally, by the way. That is a very important thing, and that has significance. So we have an opportunity, which is fantastic, and we need to mobilize not the people who are mobilizing only. We need to mobilize those public, forces of public influence, which actually make things change. And even the media, which covered our first picket that we did a week ago, they were all, very positive. I did about 15 interviews, on that day in about 1 hour. And I think they interview everybody else, not only me, they interview everybody else. So we have a fantastic opportunity. This crisis is creating extraordinary opportunities. Venezuela solidarity groups are being set up in several cities spontaneously in the UK. We're very busy sort of servicing all of them. So the thing is to get it right in terms of what exactly to put the emphasis and what is the structure of the campaigning, which aim, rather than just protesting and denouncing, which is a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. So we need to work out something which is more substantial in terms of changing, shifting, if not public opinion as a whole, a substantial part of it. That's where we're at. And, at the same time, we defend Venezuela as much as we can with everything, fighting and dismantling every stupid narrative that exists around the place, which there are plenty of.
Listen, I just want to add that the Venezuelan Solidarity Campaign in the UK is the most structured and, in my opinion, the best solidarity organization out there. No, and I'm not saying this because Francisco is here. I just wanted to set the record straight because that's my humble opinion about the work they do. And it's not only the work they do in the UK, but the one that they do in other countries in Europe. So I really appreciate that. And I just want to add to finish that we in Venezuela are shocked by what happened. Many of us believe that we might have acted more aggressively in the midst of the U.S. bombings, and I believe that certain responsibilities might arise eventually. But that's something that's going to happen eventually. We cannot waste our time thinking about that. But the most important thing that I wanted to say is that we are ready to defend our country. And despite all the U.S. technology, and we are also waiting for a second round, despite whatever Donald Trump wrote a few hours ago. I'm pretty sure, I don't want that to happen, but I'm pretty sure that when the U.S. crashes with the solidity of our Chavista leadership that is ruling the country, they will begin to think in attacking us again. And maybe they will commit the big mistake of sending troops to control Venezuelan oil facilities. And in that case, we are ready to give them hell. I mean, and we have been preparing for that. And in that scenario, all their technology is going to waste, because in that scenario, we are going to fight person to person and not with all those machines and technology that they designed to kill people. So I just wanted to add that to close my words. Venceremos.
Thank you both so much for your presentation. It's so important to talk about Venezuela, to dismantle the CIA, the empire talking lines. Venezuela is a country that resists with incredible socialist revolution and that has the courage to stand up towards the US, which many, many big countries here in Europe don't do. So our immense solidarity and love to Venezuela, to the Venezuelan people, these brave people of the Bolivarian Revolution. And thank Francisco and thank Jesús for being here with us today and for standing for Venezuela in the way both of you do. Francisco, if you want to put your email in case people want to do a Venezuela solidarity campaign, they can get in touch with you. Maybe there's a small town, someone watching us somewhere in the corner of the world and wants to do a solidarity campaign. I don't know if they could get in touch with you, Francisco, and get linked to the UK and serve as a small cell.
I'll send the email of the campaign to Ileana so that you can publicize it, including the address of the website so people can access it.
The website's already in the description. Thank you so much, Jesus. And the Orinoco Tribune website is in the description, as is the Venezuelan Solidarity Campaign. But we will also, make it easier for people and add the email on all the comments and stuff. So thank you so much, Francisco. Thank you so much.
One little thing, which is Orinoco Tribune. This is not, responding because I feel very happy with your comments. The Orinoco Tribune is one of the best, I mean this seriously, is one of the best websites that covers the news about Venezuela in a magnificent fashion. Sometimes, with critical stuff I may not agree with, but, the very fact that they do it so efficiently and the reach in terms of politics is worldwide. They cover the whole world. And I remember, I recommended my executive committee and our office team, you should use Orinoco Tribune first and foremost, and then everybody else. And they are following my directive, as it were. So thank you very much, Jesus, and everybody else in your team.
My pleasure.
Such a wonderful stuff.
My pleasure. And thank you guys also, Ileana and Sara, for doing this job too.
Thank you very much as well.
Thank you so much.
Venceremos.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, so I think that was really brilliant. We have one more thing to go over. I don't know if you need to leave, Sara, but essentially it's about Palestine, the prisoners for Palestine, the hunger strikers, the Palestine Action hunger strikers right now. Like Jesus said, really, Jesus said in that last section about how we need to be doing more important, what did he say? Kind of more aggressive, more pertinent action.
Yeah.
But, we have to also acknowledge that when you do these actions, these direct actions, you do pay an incredible price here in the UK, and these Palestine Action activists, really direct actionists, are currently in prison, and they are doing a hunger strike. And I'm just gonna share this screen because there are actual actions that people can take if you're in the UK, that the Prisoners for Palestine are asking us to do for these prisoners. So this is the website, prisonersforpalestine.org. You can go there and see there's certain actions that you can do on behalf of the current Palestine hunger strikers. You can also sign up for their training, which is on their website. But this is particularly important. Of course, this one is on January 6th, and it's January 9th here. So I think there are 9 hunger strikers, but of course the news is updating, and I'm not sure how many there are right now, but this one in particular is very, very urgent because she is Heba Muraisi she would be on her 67th day of hunger striking.
Wow.
Because it began on 3rd of November 2025. And
Wow.
she is, which is extremely, extremely scary and urgent. She's describing that she's experiencing muscle spasms and twitches in her arm, as well as feeling like she's holding her breath and doesn't know why, like she has to remind herself to breathe. So this is very, very critical. And one of her demands is to move back to HMB Bronzefield. She was transferred abruptly from that facility to HMP Newhall, which is hundreds of miles from her family and support system late last year. So that is one of the things that we can be doing is going to this website, and here you can see here that this is the updated thing. Day 68 of Heba Muraisi. Kamram Ahmed is at day 61. Louis Chiaro Mello is at day 47. And you can take action here on this website.
They are heroes.
They are absolutely heroes. I'm going to bring up the what you can be doing right now. So what you can be doing right now is to contact HMP Bronzefield today and demand they accept the transfer request. Here's the contact info. We will put it below in the description. But just to remember that Palestine Action has been prescribed as a terrorist organization here in the UK for simply doing direct action to stop Elbit Systems, the biggest arms manufacturer for Israel. It is
by the Labour Party, we need to say, by Labour Party under Keir Starmer's consent, the neo-fascist new government of Keir Starmer regime in the UK.
Yes, exactly. And we have to remember again, if this is not evidence again of the UK's active participation in the genocide in Palestine, this is, again, a reminder that we are active participants in this. Our own citizens are fighting against this. And this is the toll that I feel so emotional, sorry. But this is the consequence. Yeah, sorry. Mm-hmm. But yes, this is the consequence of doing that.
I think it's the right emotion in the right place, Ileana. It's heartbreaking to see a genocide in pictures and to have a Labour government sending the message in the UK that if you are pro-Palestine, you'll be equal with a terrorist, you'll be treated like a terrorist, you'll be dismissed from your job. It was my case. One of the reasons was how I supported Palestine. I was dismissed from the English government. This is a little a price to pay. My price was little, but we are all paying a price here to stand against genocide, while others in the society are completely quiet to save their own skin, while the people of Palestine is being brutally tortured by the UK active participation in their own colonial partition in Palestine. It's disgraceful, the role of the UK, and these people are heroes. Thank you for bringing them. Very important message. And I think your emotions are so welcome and so real. I share them.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Yes, and to just remind everyone, that doesn't know, Palestine Action has never harmed anybody. They have never harmed anyone. Their entire action was about pouring paint or disruption of the headquarters of factories that are profiting from genocidal crimes. And for that, they were prescribed as a terrorist organization in the UK. And that is the price of so-called freedom of speech here in the UK. So just a reminder of that. Anyone who can call, please do call. But yes, we'll keep us updated on this because it is an urgent matter. As we said, it's very worrying what these prisoners are facing. They're just demanding to see a representative from the parliament, and they're just demanding specific things for Palestine. That's all. But you can read more about it on their website. Right. So this was our first weekly live back, Sara. It was still quite a long one, but there was a lot to discuss. And it's very, very harrowing. I think I feel very emotional even after the Venezuela one, emotional after here, but this is the world that we're living in, unfortunately. So yes. Thank you.
I will see you later today with our dinner with our special guest, Carlos. Thank you guys for being here, for supporting our very independent journalism. Please like, subscribe, leave your comment if you want. And if you
become a patron on Patreon. Yes, because we really need to diversify our platform. And if you can donate to our Patreon, or there have been some very kind gifts today, which we really appreciate. We're just trying to cover our costs. Sara just mentioned that we will be having dinner with Carlos Martinez, who was our first guest ever on Weekly Live. And he might be a co-host next week on our Friday Weekly Live, as you will be traveling, Sara. So we're going to try to convince him tonight to come back and see if he will.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you, Ileana.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.